So my name's Dr Roy Lowry. I'm an Associate Professor of Physical Chemistry at the University of Plymouth. The problem that we needed to solve was the fact that our foundation year suddenly became very popular. So we had double the number of students in a cohort, and the marking load would have it would have broken me. I don't know about my colleagues. And this cohort is not the same as the cohort that came in 5 years ago, or certainly 10 years ago. So we constantly have to innovate and change things in order to suit these new students that are coming in. And so obviously the way to go get through that problem was to use something online and use online marking, at which point LearnSci turned up in the search criteria, if you like, and it quite quickly became a two-way relationship that really worked very well. The problem really boiled down to the fact that we wanted to make sure that students would go into the lab and then use their own raw data, because that meant that they had ownership of that data, and there was more of themselves invested in actually then doing the post-lab of the nasty calculations. So that meant that a normal Moodle quiz could not handle that. And yet the Smart Worksheets, that was exactly what they were designed to do. So I worked alongside Ian from LearnSci, and we came up with a Smart Worksheet for each of the 4 practicals that we wanted marked. I have this thing that you really shouldn't throw a student in at the deep end. So I wanted to make sure that they felt confident with running the worksheets interface before they were summatively assessed. So there were 2 assessment types. One was gravimetric, one was titometric. And then for each of those, there was a formative one and a summative one. The formative one looked identical to the summative one, except that it had feedback, whereas the summative one, we just turned the feedback off. One of the major things I really was interested in finding out was whether or not the students would engage with these formative assessments, because quite a lot of my colleagues will tell me, oh, there's no point in doing formative because if there's no marks attached, the student won't do it. Well, it turned out that roughly half of them did engage with the formative assessments. And since we were looking at cohorts of well over 100, sometimes up to 190, that's quite a lot of students. Equally, it meant that we had a really nice statistically significant data set to play with, because half of the students were engaging with the formative and half of them weren't. And how did the half that did do with the summative assessments versus the half that didn't engage with the formative? The results were that there's a very significant uplift in marks for students who do engage with the formative. And consequently, I then feed that back to the following year and that. But each cohort's slightly different. But there's definitely a statistical difference between those students who did engage with the formative and those that didn't. And it's always a marked uplift. And in fact, the whole study is now written up along with Emily from LearnSci and has just been submitted to JChem Ed. So we came into this almost in crisis mode, because we had a cohort that was double the size of what we used to. And all of a sudden, that over Christmas marking period, oh, no marking. Some quality assurance, of course, but a quick look through proved that the system was doing what it should do. And in fact, after about the first 2 years, I didn't do any quality assurance because there was no need. All of a sudden, we had a lot more time. Equally, in the second, third, and fourth labs, we would spend time walking around looking at the students' work from the previous week and giving them some feedback. That was now happening online. We now had much more time to walk around the lab and have maybe more detailed conversations about this week's practice, last week's practice. Why was it done in a certain way, rather than why can't I calculate the number of moles correctly? So much deeper conversations, less mechanistic. We didn't do a formal survey to find out whether or not these students actually realised that we were doing something new. We just left the module evaluation open as we normally did. And there's a free-form box on the back of that. And immediately it was good feedback on how the students liked the fact that they could test out their understanding before it became a summative assessment. They liked the fact that it was their own data. the fact that they could essentially do a dry run. And that was unasked for data, essentially, but it came straight back at us.